there seems to be a growing tariff, right? Like a, a, a tax, a cost. Now we are working often in, dual income households. And after work, we're coming home and we're still doing 70% of the invisible labor. Now, caretaking is seen as a lesser valuable offering and one that should be contracted out to others.
Mm.
But it turns out that, in my opinion, that's where so much of our fulfillment lies, is in our relationships as women, not through our success, not through our achievement, and not through, hedonistic one night stands. We can walk that walk, but does it actually fulfill us? Do we actually feel happy? Do we actually feel like we've arrived at the place that we know by birthright we are entitled to inhabit?
Kelly, it is so lovely to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. We were talking a little bit offline there that your book, A Mind of Your Own, was the book that I would say gave me the confidence to go against medical advice, because longtime listeners of the show will know my own journey from kind of corporate lawyer to burnout and then postnatal depression, which then led to a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. And I was at a real low point where I was on multiple medications to control for sort of bipolar episodes, and told that I would be on medication for life. And it was, I'd healed myself in many respects over the course of about 4 or 5 years. And then in 2018, I read your book, and that's when I decided I now am ready to look at making that transition to come off medication. And it took me, I think, until the end of 2019, October 2019, so literally 5 years ago. And I fortunately had a very understanding GP who agreed that we would do this. And he was sort of like, Angela, we'll do this once. And it worked. So I first want to start by saying thank you. I think you've probably helped so many women, but thank you for helping me.
Well, as I mentioned, if there's any service that I provide in this capacity, it's probably the same service that I provide in whatever topic I'm having a positive influence in somebody's sphere around. And it's just to expand the permission. As you said, it's like once you learned what was possible, it somehow afforded you options that maybe you didn't know existed, before then. And so I do enjoy playing that role, because so many women have played that role for me, really expanded the permission field of what kind of a woman I can be and what kind of identities I can shed, and how I can move into and through some of my greatest discomforts and hugest fears and come out the other side like a phoenix rising. So it's a beautiful dance, that we get to move together in.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I was going to read from it, but actually, why don't you start? You have your new book out that came out in, I think it was June of this year,
Yeah.
The Reclaimed Woman. Can you start by just explaining what is the Reclaimed Woman?
So many of us, it seems like a larger and larger pool of women every time I have this conversation. Many of us as women are feeling confused about the gaslight that says we should feel happy and fulfilled, right? We have it all. We have our careers. We can have babies or not. We can get married or not. We are free. And especially in the hegemony of American culture, we get to enjoy unprecedented levels of rights and entitlements and power. And yet, so many of us feel resentful. We feel bitter. We feel exhausted and wired. We feel overwhelmed. We struggle with a sense of numbness that I call living behind a glass wall, where even the seemingly enjoyable moments, even the peak experiences in your life, can feel kind of hollow. And so, what is that about, right? Like, what's actually going on, and why are we struggling with unprecedented levels of burnout when we're in the midst of the greatest promise fulfilled, especially as offered by a lot of feminist efforts over the past decade? decades. And so my exploration in this book is really from the trenches of my own experience as a woman who has secured a lot of the promise of feminism in the form of success, achievement, independence, self sufficiency as a single mom who supports herself and has a very successful business, has a meaningful life experience, and is on mission in so many ways. I can attest to a lot of the fulfillment that still feels somewhere out there, over there. And so the plot twist that I found is that the true reclamation involves coming home to your own embodiment, coming home to this vessel that is your female body, and beginning to feel safe in your own skin, so that there isn't anything on the outside that you have to secure, arrange, or otherwise, succeed in procuring so that you can finally feel okay. And in offering yourself that safety, which seems to have an arc, right? There seems to be this journey that starts with the physical, it starts with lifestyle, it starts with what I call the chopping wood and carrying water of this self-attunement, right? Like, what time are you waking up? What are you eating for breakfast? What kind of water are you drinking? Like, how actually are you creating the conditions for your physical body and your nervous system to begin to experience safety? But then it also tracks into these other arenas that we understand as emotional and relational, right? So how is it that you can resolve the patterns of uh, dysfunction that you have in your romantic relationships with your children, in your business or financial life? You can have a very healthy body. You can be relieved of diagnoses and prescriptions, and yet you can still struggle in your relationships and with these patterns of disempowerment and what I refer to as our victim stories, right? Like the no fair, I hate this, why me? Kind of energy that we bring to a lot of our unwanted experiences in life. And so, what I found is that there are ways that we can show up for ourselves as women. I call it self husbanding, but essentially, it's the invocation of our own inner safety mechanisms so that you can start to really create the conditions for your feminine energy, for your creativity, for your pleasure, for your desires to begin to unfurl. You don't have to try to be a softer, more pleasure led woman. It actually just happens when you create the conditions of safety in your life so that you can break these habits and cycles of choosing to source from the impossible place what it is that you want. And I call it trying to buy eggs from the hardware store, right? Where you're no longer insisting that the person in front of you, whether it's your lover or your husband or your child, be different than they are so that you can finally feel okay. So resolving that, it turns out, requires an experience of integrating these dimensions of yourself and coming into command of your nervous system so that you can see choices that you wouldn't otherwise see, and you can start to experience your own power and creative access in your life as a woman that leads you to the place where things feel playful instead of broken, instead of like impossibly overwhelming.
Mm.
And so the book really details like the very practical tools because I'm nothing if not a practical gal. I'm a former New Yorker and born and bred, and I have a lot of that kind of like, give it to me straight, let's go kind of energy. And I have been on a journey the past many years to understand how it is that I can finally feel fulfillment, like deep tissue saturating fulfillment in my life. And it's involved looking at some difficult assumptions, I would say, that I've made as a woman around how I could um, feel happiness and joy. And I found that I was wrong about a whole lot of things. And a lot of women seem to resonate with what I've come upon. So it's really that, journey detailed, and it's meant to be a roadmap to reroute you from where we thought and where we were told we could experience this fulfillment. And I just don't think it's waiting for us there.
And it's, I mean, there's so much to unpack there. It's compelling reading right from it hooks you, the book. I love your writing style right from the beginning. I guess one of the things I want to touch on first of all is you talk a lot about the masculine and the feminine. And I think that if I look back at my own journey, certainly as a corporate lawyer, that was
Yeah.
about embracing the masculine.
Oh, yeah.
That's how it was all the way, right? The
Yeah.
all-nighters, the weekends, the ignoring my health, the putting off the
Exactly.
family. And we're so much in our masculine. That was something I had to confront for sure. I think that's a common thread among women because we've almost been taught we need to do that to
Yeah.
survive. And you talk a lot about safety and security. Can you explain for listeners what you think's going on there and why so many of us are sort of conditioned that way if we want to get ahead in life?
Yeah. So we're a couple of generations into an agenda that sought to solve the problem of female vulnerability, right? I actually see this as biologically inbuilt and maybe even by sacred design. However, it is a reality that women walk this plane biologically vulnerable in a way that men are not. And it could boil down to, if I displease a man in front of me, he could 99% of the time extinguish my life with his bare hands. Okay.
Mhm.
It also extends to the fundamentally egalitarian, right? Like the fundamentally unequal and unlevel playing field of sex and the potential consequences biologically that can result in the form of pregnancy, whether or not we embrace all of uh, the gifts of the pharmaceutical world when it comes to birth control and contraception. These vulnerabilities are very difficult to contend with when we live in a world where we do not feel that men are taking our best interest to heart. Right? Which is, I think, a lot of how we have come to understand man-woman dynamics, that there is a zero-sum game happening. And the way that several waves actually of feminism have come to offer us a solution is to say, well, if they're so safe over there, if they're so powerful, then we should just do what they're doing. Like, I'll have what he's having kind of psychology. And if we can mimic them, which actually we're quite able to do, right? If we can mimic them well, then we will feel as safe and empowered as they are. So that means we suppress our emotions and our biological cycles with pharmaceuticals. It means we command, our entitlement to the spiritual rite of passage that is childbirth through medicalized birth. And it goes into infant and childcare that we hand over our babies to industry, right? And we admit our weakness, our flaws, our incapacity to handle this through our native biology. And it also requires that we embrace a relationship to our sexual energy that is fundamentally masculine in nature. It's masculine cycles of sexual chase and capture. It is this hedonistic promise of the sexual revolution that we should just be able to have no strings attached sex just like men, and we'll finally feel free and happy then. And it also is in our comportment towards our role in society as producers, right? So the idea that we should be providing and producing just the way that men do. And that requires that we relate to our career in a linear manner, right? So we don't have maternity leave. We don't have this idea that over the course of our menstrual cycle, there should be ebbs and flows in our energy and availability. We just collapse ourselves into this linear functionality that we see available to men. And while that may have secured many things, And that may allow us to feel, well, I can own property and I can pay taxes and I can, have a baby or not. And if I have a baby, I can put that baby in childcare and no big thing, I'll get back to work. Um, there seems to be a growing tariff, right? Like a, t- a tax, a cost. There seems to be a sense that we have been maybe duped, right? That what actually has happened is that now we are working often in, dual income households. And after work, we're coming home and we're still doing 70% of the invisible labor. We are still managing and responsible for so many aspects of homemaking and childcare that have not been sufficiently farmed out to poorer women's bodies. And we are overwhelmed and we are feeling um, this sense of many of us having been spread so thin without any of the fulfillment that I think was formerly available to women who were very clearly relegated to the domestic realm of caretaking. Right now, caretaking is seen as a lesser valuable offering and one that should be contracted out to others,
Mm.
right? But it turns out that, in my opinion, that's where so much of our fulfillment lies, is in our relationships as women, not through our success, not through our achievement, and not through, hedonistic one night stands. Like we can walk that walk, but does it actually fulfill us? Do we actually feel happy? Do we actually feel like we've arrived at the place that we know by birthright we are entitled to inhabit?
Mm.
And so, yeah, I mean, doctor, lawyer, I mean, we're cut from the same cloth, and I worked those endless hours and I chased this sense of I will feel fulfilled when for the better part of, I don't know, 20 years. And I think that so many women are it's almost like it's like a mountain, right? And they're scaling this very, very high mountain and they're coming up the mountain, but then there are those of us who have really like summited it in a way. And not that it's like some kind of value system. There's just ways that you can come almost into an exaggerated expression of performance and mission orientation. And I do think that these professional credentialed sort of occupations really exemplify that value system, right? What I would call the masculine value system.
Mm.
And it's almost like I think you and I might be examples of women who get to the top of at least one of the summits of achievement. And we get there and we look around and we're like, I I am arguably here, right? Like I did arguably
Mm.
arrive somewhere. And yet I don't feel good at all, right? Like something feels very wrong. Something feels very off. And the feeling I have is like I want to look down the mountain and be like, ladies, it's not up here. What we're told is up here. It's not up here. So maybe turn around. And I think if they were to turn around, the question would still be, well, where do I go? Like, how do I feel good? Like, what is in it for me? You're telling me I'm just supposed to be like a wife and a mother and feel good about that without my own career and my own finances? Like, these are big existential questions that I actually think we've been teed up by this collective evolution to ask. We're at this extraordinary moment in human history where we can choose to be in whatever flavor of feminine expression we want to. And I feel like I've really gone deep and hard into the world that says, I can have what he's having. And as a mother and somebody who has been married, I can tell you that I do not believe we can have it all. I don't. And so there are some choices to make. And those choices mostly ask that we align with our own values and we align with our own priorities and begin to unpack the ways that we might be lying to ourselves, right? So if I choose to get married, if I choose to have babies, and yet I'm still behaviorally putting my career first, there's an inherent split there. There's an inherent conflict there that will eventually declare itself. I mean, again, for me, it took 10, 15 years to do so. But it will eventually, and there will be an invitation to realign and reprioritize. And as that happens, your system will start to exhale, 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 exhale. And there will be a part that is terrified to lose what it is that you gained through the surrogate identity, the false self. That was, in that career, let's say in my case,
Mm.
or, that was otherwise um, feeling like it was working-ish, like it was working as good as it needed to. And you just need to apply more time and effort and just stay at it, stay on that hustle. And eventually there's going to be a respite. Eventually there's going to be like an oasis on the horizon. And I'm not sure that's the nature of it, right? So that's why navigating these dark nights of the soul, like navigating the loss of that which we imagine we would die without, um, answering the call of our soul to expand into more of ourself as we become less of who we thought we needed to be. This is this is a very treacherous terrain that I think really requires that we look to other women uh, to open up, as we were talking about, this permission field um, to be a woman in ways we didn't think we were allowed to be.
I love that. How do you think like women can give themselves permission? Because I think some women will feel some women listening to this are very successful. The podcast is all about
Yeah.
high performance health. So it's about being healthy as well in your relationships and your
Yeah.
body and your mind as much as it is high performance. And some people have that career and they'll be thinking, how can I take that step back? And they're definitely feeling what you're saying and they want to spend more time with their children. I know that was true for me with
Yeah.
corporate law and I left. And then there may be other women who feel like, actually, I feel in this situation right now, I need to work. Maybe they're paying
Yeah.
for kids' education, doing things, and they're trying to get on with things, but they realize it doesn't feel quite right. What
Yeah.
would you say? How can they deepen that connection with themselves and find their own, like recognize their values and figure out what's right for them in a way that's going to work for themselves and their family?
Yes. So I don't think it's helpful to get into big picture decision making. That's a symptom of the very problem we're looking to unwind, right? So, but I have to work, but I know this isn't fulfilling to me, or I'm stuck in this marriage because if I leave this and that, all of that is masculine problem solving. And it's actually
Mm.
what I would describe as immature masculine that requires a solution in order to feel confident, comfortable, and otherwise oriented in life, right? So if we don't do that, then what we're left with is the opportunity to develop a different relationship to what is felt about what is. Okay. So I actually, sometimes tongue in cheek say this is the only spiritual practice you ever need. And I call it entering through the upset. And all that it means is that you make a quiet commitment to yourself as a woman to, from here on out, put your felt experience first. Now, what does that mean? Okay. What that means is whenever you feel any degree of upset, that's the word I like to use because it's like kind of a catch all for the small, literally, like somebody cuts you off in traffic, you forget something important you were supposed to bring, you get an annoying email, uh, all the way to the big. Like, it's time to leave the relationship. It's time to have that uncomfortable conversation with your brother. You just experienced a huge loss of some variety. And if you remember this phrase, enter through the upset, then you might start to create what I think is the ultimate pattern disrupt for a woman in the modern era, which is to say, I'm not going to arrange the elements of my outer reality to try forever and desperately to feel some degree of safety and okayness. I am going to stay with me. I'm going to stay with me in the moments that I feel upset, and I am going to give a shit about how I feel because it starts with you. Nobody can possibly give a shit about how you feel in the way that you are looking for, which is called intimacy, which is called connection, right? Which is called feeling seen and understood by the person in front of you. That is literally impossible. I don't think it will ever happen, not for one moment of your life, until you have an experience with yourself of what that even looks like. So, what that can look like is really simple. There's no special technique, there's no special practice. It's the meta commitment that you're making that when you feel that upset, and you might be like me, where you feel it just for like microseconds before you spring into action and you send the email back, or you call somebody, or you text somebody, or you get on a voice note to a girlfriend. You're in action, right? You might only feel just a little bit, but as you begin to recognize, wow, I'm upset right now, you will drop everything. Okay, so you're not going to send the email just then. You're not going to voice note. You're not going to start solving and fixing. And you might go into the bathroom and close the door. You might go into your bedroom. You might just literally walk off into the backyard for 90 seconds. You can set a timer. And all you're going to do is track with your attention what's actually occurring in your body. So you don't have to label it, I'm feeling sad or angry. It's not that kind of an exercise. You're just offering your attention, which is your masculine energy, right? You're offering your presence to what is occurring inside. I see that. And maybe it feels like fluttering in your heart or clenching in your throat or a pit in your stomach. You're just, I see that. I see that. I see that. And what I find personally helpful is what I call self-husbanding. I referenced, right? So I invoke inside of me the energy of a good husband, right? It could be a good father, whatever you want to call it. Which is, it's like my spine grows strong. My gaze almost begins to rest in the back of my head, right? And there's this sense of like, I'm here for you, baby. What you got? Right? There's this sense of deep, devoted, unwavering, unfuckable with presence. And I do that. It literally takes 4 or 5 seconds. I invoke that energy inside of myself. And from that gaze, I observe what's occurring. And within 90 seconds, I can virtually guarantee, because of the alchemical nature of emotions, the sensations will shift and change. And what will become more available to you if you want to take it deeper is the true alchemical potential of the psycho-emotional realm. And what I mean by that is that you can apply your mind to recruit now this liberated energy that otherwise would have been stuffed and stored and potentially manifested as literal symptoms and illness, right? You can recruit that to reclaim aspects of yourself that are out there over there. Okay. The easiest ways to do that are through complaint and judgment. Okay. So judgment is the way, like, the easiest place to do this is when you're feeling judgmental of somebody else, or you've just gotten feedback that somebody is judging you. Okay. So let's say you get an email from somebody in your family and they're like, you're always so selfish. It's really infuriating, you know? For most of us, that email would not feel good, right? And might generate some degree of upset, right? So you would do that 90-second business I just described. And after that short a period of time, you will have more availability to play with this, right? Because there's fixing energy, there's creating energy. When you're in fixing energy, you almost always need to act in defensive ways to secure somebody else's perception. So I call it getting them to see, right? So you're going to send, no, I'm not. You're the one who's selfish. And how dare you say that? Look at all these things I've done, right? So that kind of energetic signature is giving away your vital force to the enemy, so-called enemy, right? I call it the erotic caress of the enemy because now you're tied in with them, right? Because you can't get somebody to see something. You literally can't, but you're going to try, and you might try for years, right? In my family, there are people who've been trying for decades, right? I come from an Italian lineage. It's like what we do. So the um the reclamation is in valuing your energy enough and what it feels like to be in this kind of, I think of it as almost mischievous, but this playful orientation towards creativity and creating the life experience that you want, that you're not going to give it out that easy. Okay. So, what you might do is a practice that I call wearing the villain crown. Right. So, you might say, she says that I'm so selfish. Right. And there's going to be a part that says, no, you're not. That's ridiculous. She's the selfish one. Right. And if it bothers you that she said that, it means, in my opinion, that there is a part of you that actually does believe that you are what she says you are. You don't have a relationship with that part because you're busy relating to it on the outside of you as her. Okay. Right. But in this process, you're just going to, in the quiet of your own home or the privacy of your own moment, you're going to put on that villain crown and try on the possibility that you're selfish, right? Maybe it's true. Maybe you are. What if you are? And you're just going to stop there and allow for a minute or two that possibility to be true. And you might start to feel connection to that part that believes or has learned that um, it could be true, right? That you are this bad thing. Basically, the part of you that believes that you're bad and wrong, right? You're beginning to develop a connection to that part, and you're beginning to actually listen and say, okay, I hear you. So I am selfish. Okay. I hear you. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean you're going to now go into the world and admit to everybody that you're so it doesn't mean anything in the action realm. This is alchemical reclamation. You are taking back the energy that otherwise would live on this family member and you'd fight with forever, right? You're going to take it back by seeing that it's already there in you. When you offer your gaze, your attention to these unwanted stories and beliefs inside of yourself, and by the way, it could come in the form of you're so selfish. It could come in the form of like this extraordinary lover saying you are God's gift to the world and you have the most perfect body that he's ever, right? So it could come in any flavor. It's just something that feels uncomfortable, that feels somehow upsetting, and that you kind of are not down with making true, right? That there's a conflict in you about holding. It's often the sign that there's an unseen part of you that already is holding that possibility, is holding that belief, is holding that associated feelings. So when you try on the villain crown that you are indeed selfish, you get to practice being seen as bad and wrong in the eyes of another. That's mature adult comportment towards others, where you see, I have my perception, they have their perception. I'm not interested and able to control theirs. And I can hold the possibility that I am, as Jung would say, the tension of opposites, that I am both and, that I am, sinner and saint. And you no longer project that outside of yourself in the form of idealization and vilification. And all of a sudden, this energy is now yours to play with. And almost always after this practice, especially when it's like high stakes, there will be a creative impulse, right? Like you'll feel like, you know, recording a video of yourself dancing around. You'll feel like writing a poem. You'll feel like painting a painting. You'll feel like singing a song. You'll feel like trying something new. You'll call somebody up you haven't, talked to in a long time. And this creative impulse is the beginning of the restoration of your open channel where you can then be guided by these impulses and this desire. And the last thing I'll say is like another way to open up that channel it may sound really weird, but it's to begin to honor like your biological impulses, right? So if the whole goal is to open up our channel to God, right? To open up our intuition, to begin to trust our desire again as a guiding force, not only for ourselves, but actually an organizing force for every dimension of this plane. Starting to rebuild that relationship can come with sending your body the message that you are listening and that you care. And so there's a practice that I actually began to implement in my own life and then started to teach. And I've gotten feedback that it really makes a huge difference in a short period of time. And it has to do with how you relate to your own need to pee. Okay. So I've like jokingly called it
Okay.
urinary reclamation. And what that means is that, we have been conditioned from school age, when we were in institutionalized schooling and we were told that you couldn't pee, you had to raise your hand to pee, it's not the time, right? We're starting to be trained around this idea that we can only honor our biological needs on somebody else's timetable, that we have to really suppress those when it serves another person's agenda, especially if that person is in some degree of power over us, right? So the reclamation of that begins with the subtle way we talk about having to go to the bathroom, right? Like if you ever have two women together, let's say they're out to dinner or something, and one has to go to the bathroom, I can virtually guarantee you that the one who has to go to the bathroom will say, I'll be right back, or I'm going to
Mm.
go pee quick. Or she just will like hold it for like uncomfortable periods of time and wait until it's like the right moment for the person in front of her, or so she perceives, for the relational dynamic in order to go to the bathroom.
So
Okay.
true.
Right. It's,
Yeah.
and especially if you have kids, like as a mom, I don't even like close the door, when I pee, in case my kids need me, when I'm taking 1 minute, okay, to pee. So you're going to change your language where you start to, and often I have to correct myself, but where you start to say something like, I am going to the bathroom, right? You don't say quickly, I'll be right back, give me a minute, none of that, just the facts. Okay. And then you're going to go when you need to go. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's inconvenient. I have started to take bathroom breaks in the middle of a podcast. Okay. And you're going to prioritize that. This doesn't mean this becomes your ethos forever. It's a period of restoration and reunion. Okay. So you're prioritizing actually listening to what your body needs. This also, by the way, could look like other things. Like you're sitting on your couch, you're basically comfortable, but you're like kind of thirsty, or like your feet are kind of cold. So you're just going to start to take those little, hits of awareness seriously and take care of yourself, serve yourself the way you would love for a devoted partner, to always be on top of your every need and creating the conditions for your comfort, pleasure, and, enjoyment of life. Okay. So then you go to the bathroom and you're going to start to access the inbuilt pleasure that already exists in your body. And you can access it as you bring your awareness to the experience of moving from the state of having to be to the relief of not having to be any longer, right? So when you bring your awareness to that transition, there's actually pleasure there. And it's just one of, I don't know, about a million examples, right? You could access it brushing your hair, running your nails up your forearm. You could access it putting oil on your face. You could access it like sipping tea or biting into a mango. I mean, there's so many opportunities of inbuilt pleasure that our senses afford us that we are dissociated and disconnected from. And this is a simple biological one. And bringing your attention to that starts to reinforce why it might be worth prioritizing what your body is asking you to prioritize, and actually start caring for yourself in this way. So that's one of the many examples of how you can start to reorder your priorities and values to what they've always been. But yet we've allowed ourselves to be colonized by a different set of values that are not ultimately going to afford us the fulfillment that a sensually based life focused on connection first to ourselves and then to the other humans in our midst, um, has the potential to offer us.
I love this because it's very different. I know, like, for example, in therapy, I was often taught, right, to bring mindful attention to it, but not to the degree that you're sort of discussing here, where you actually feel into it. It's a little bit like with that example that you gave around the email. You might be told, think about the gap between the stimulus and the response, and you pause. But actually, what you're saying here is to embrace all parts of you, right? Including the shadow self, embrace all of you, but even to go one step further and acknowledge your needs and also enjoy the experience that life is offering you every step of the way. So you're kind of, I guess, you're loving yourself, right? Or loving into yourself.
It's a radical approach to making nothing wrong.
Hmm.
And that is, it's holofractal, right? So it starts within yourself. And I'll give you an example of how we often take the bait in the spiritual communities that we find ourselves in. And it extends to your life experience, right? So, my most of my career has been spent in the arena of not making symptoms wrong, right? Not making your insomnia a problem, not making your anxiety a problem, not making your diarrhea a problem, your hair loss, your weight gain, your joint pain, right? Like, how can we stay on our own damn team? That's how you end the victim triangle cycle of suffering and pain, is you do not take the bait of triangulating against yourself, of insisting that some way that you are is actually bad and wrong and needs to be fixed, right? Because we recruit outside authorities, we recruit outside, partners and dynamics and relationships and experts and all these things, who actually will, come on board and say, yeah, you do need to fix this about yourself. Again, whether that's through a pharmaceutical or through a retreat or, some kind of spiritual practice. What if the baseline that we start with is there's actually not a problem here, right? Um, what you'll find is that you have a lot of preferential treatment of parts of yourself. Okay. And there is a habit that we have of trying to coerce parts of ourselves to see things differently. Okay. Like an example is I remember I was outside on my back patio one day a couple of years ago. And, I live in Miami. It's so beautiful here. It's like the feeling of the air on my skin. And I was looking at these beautiful trees, and the light was filtering in this extraordinary way. And there was like this ridiculously beautiful flower, and it smelled delicious. And I just had this moment of feeling like so full that I couldn't hold it, right? So what do we do in that instance? I start to think about how I might have, been able to discharge it better if somebody was with me. Okay. So it was like too much for me to hold in my own system. So I started to feel like, oh, wow, like I wish I wasn't here alone in this moment. I want to experience this with somebody else. And then I started to feel really lonely, like deep, both loneliness and aloneness. And it was almost like a plumb line dropped in the center of my body. And it was like existential, right? But then I started to feel so uncomfortable with that, right? So we have a lot of constraint on both ends of the spectrum, on the pleasure, expansion, joy end, which I just described, but also on the, unwanted despair, grief, anger, rage, that kind of spectrum. Like we have limited capacity. So we end up in this narrow band. Okay. So I started to feel this loneliness, and almost immediately a part came in and said, well, you're not alone. You have your kids, your friends come over
Mm.
all the time. Look, you have your pets. They're right here. You're not alone. Everything is okay. Right.
So you're
And
sort of
I might
defending the position.
exactly.
Mm,
And a lot of positive psychology and a lot of new age thinking would collude with that part that
mm,
says, look for the amazing things in your life. Yes, you're not alone. You have so much to appreciate. And subtly, but importantly, cut me off and triangulate me against the part that says, this hurts. Just this, being a
mm,
human, okay? Incarnating this hurts. And my allegation is that until I develop total radical embrace and acceptance of the part that just said, this hurts, without trying to get that part to see why it shouldn't hurt, I am cut off from a dimension of my own vital force because that's a part of me too. So I have all of these parts in me, like shitty, lying, cheating, shallow, conniving, manipulating parts, right? And then I have parts that can see the beauty and feel the gratitude and just like are overflowing with like the abundance of what it is to be here. And then I have, parts that are, trying to manage the relationship between the two. And a lot of the time, these parts don't see each other, but they all have, and this is fundamental to, methodologies like internal family systems, they all have benevolent intent. They're all here for me. So there's no such thing, in my opinion, as self sabotage, as like the bad inner critic that you need to shut up. There's no such thing as like addiction that just needs to be squashed out, right? Once you understand and can connect to the benevolent intent of each and every voice and sensation inside of you, all of your bad habits and dysfunctional practices, you can access the gifts of those parts. They can be almost like reassigned to new roles as they see you in your adult shoes, right? So you start to shed these childlike patterns that really have served and worked up until a given point. And you can start to try on the possibility of standing in your adult shoes, choosing your life, and beginning to feel the dividends of the aliveness that was locked up in those parts beneath your awareness. Right. So just beginning to interest yourself, like, tell me more. I hear you. Okay. I'm listening. Right. Offering yourself that is the beginning of unlocking dimensions of aliveness. Cause at least that's what I started to recognize. Like, that's what I'm after. Right. It's like,
mm.
I'm not like super interested in like feeling happy all the time. Um, Nor do I even think that's like in the cards for me. Nor do I care. It's not what I'm after. I'm after a feeling of aliveness. And I will get that feeling, whether it's through dramas, which trust me, I am especially good at cooking up in my life, or whether it's through intentional exploration of relationships, practices, experiences, and sources of inspiration that offer me that aliveness.
So I love what you're saying there because it's so interesting, and I think so important. I remember with my own experience, right? I'd identified for so many years as a corporate lawyer. That was what I did. And then when I had my children, and that actually was driven, I think, in part, well, very much by the masculine, right? And a strong father and things like that.
Yeah.
And then when I gave up my legal career, and I was really struggling with my mental health, and feeling that just sense of self-loathing and shame, and really just wanted my life to end. um, I had to go on that journey of self-discovery, because I remember one of my best friend from law school saying to me, "But is your identity wrapped up in you as a lawyer?" And I had to do that work. And to the outside world, it was like you with the flower, right? And the beautiful day is it was like, but what do I have to be depressed about? I have a wonderful husband, 3 beautiful children. I don't need to work. Like, I'm in this privileged position. What
You
right
should
do
be
I
happy.
have to be exactly? You should be happy. What right do I have to be depressed? And I had to like let that element go and not judge that in order to go on that exploration of who I was.
Yeah.
And I think that so often, I don't know what your thoughts are, Kelly, but I think too often we suppress it, right? Because we're like, no, I'm not allowed to be like that. I should be. And there's all these shoulds in the
Yes.
way of us actually discovering ourselves.
right? Which is just another way of uh, insisting that you not have a relationship with the part of you that is screaming, right? Like the
Mm,
part of you that is grieving, the part of you that is mourning, the part of you that is starving, right? And sometimes people call that, the inner child, right? And that's why this concept of these parts bearing gifts, right? So playfulness and creativity and just like the pleasure of, light dancing on a leaf, kind of a thing, uh, is relatable to anybody who has turned towards this screaming, grieving, and otherwise previously like suppressed part of themselves. But I think it's a lot simpler, really, to just care about what you're feeling. Doesn't matter if it's rational, doesn't matter if you can explain it, right? Like this is one of the habits of self-betrayal that women have been enculturated around is that our feelings actually require a reason to exist, right? Instead of your yes just being your yes and your no just being your no. When we need to validate our no, I can't come to the party because we're already in relational self-betrayal.
mm,
And that doesn't mean you just need to say, like, to your friend who invited you to the party, like, "No, no, I'm not coming," right? It actually means that you get into a practice of speaking in ways that honor you and the other person, right? So it's the autonomy and the connection. It's not one over the other, right? So you might say, you know, "I'm not available, on Sunday," or "It's just not gonna work for me." Right? And so you start to understand how to translate in a connected, respectful way your felt experience of no. And it also means that when you feel a yes, when you feel like it's time to take this new class or to, call that person or to, pursue something frivolous on a Wednesday afternoon, you don't require a litigation level treatise on why that is a good idea in order to honor it, where you simply are in the practice of honoring your little yes, I call it, because it almost these felt, yes and no sensations inside, they're subtle. They're not like the hell yes and fuck no. It's not like that. They often don't even have any charge at all. It's like a tap. It's like a nope, that doesn't work for you. Or, yep, I'm going to do that. And then there will sometimes be like a pile of the antithesis, like a pile of the opposite on top, right? So you say, no, I don't want to go to that party. And then there's like oh, but she's going to be so hurt if you don't go. Just go. You have nothing else going on anyway. It's not a big deal. Like, what is it going to cost you? Just go. That has a lot of charge,
mm,
right? And it often compels a certain kind of action. And in the reverse, right? Like, let's say, you know, I pass a billboard and it's about like salsa dancing. And I feel this little like, ooh, right? And then this big pile of no comes on top. I live in Miami, right? So it's like, oh, you gringa, like don't even try. Everybody's going to be Latin there and they're going to be so good at it. You're going to make a fool of yourself. And plus, you should have like a partner to bring with you. You're just going to show up and like dance with whoever. That's ridiculous. Like, right. So the no on top is going to have an agenda. Whereas the little yes was just like, yeah, okay. Right?
mm,
So you start to open the channel of awareness around that little yes and no. Um, but it takes time to restore the awareness and the trust, and that's why I am a big believer that the order of operations that is most easeful is to start with, the chopping wood and carrying water of physical balance and lifestyle based medicine and beginning to come into reconnection to the power of your choice through, a health reclamation protocol. Obviously I'm biased around my own vital mind reset, but however you get to the place where you are in the command seat of your own health, get there. Okay. And then things will feel clearer, right? Like you don't have like, all this joint pain and bloating and brain fog and all that stuff clouding up the sensory mechanism that is this vessel. And when you start to play with that yes and that no that you're feeling inside, the signals become clearer and clearer. Like some people use muscle testing or different kinesiology approaches. For me, it's like that. It's a little whisper, and I've come to recognize it.
Mm.
It's never too late. It's never too late to open that channel up.
It's really interesting what you say there, because I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but you're right. Sometimes the yes is just a little yes, right? And there's this overwhelming sort of barrage in the other direction, which again is very, I guess, very masculine. What about when someone has a repeated pattern from their childhood? So they feel like they're always kind of ending up with that guy that isn't right for them, or they don't feel like they're holding themselves back from either the financial success or the kind of position or like leadership success. There's just in one area of their life, and
Yeah,
sometimes it's more than one, right? They're really
yeah,
crushing it in one area quite often.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And then these other areas, they just keep showing up. What do you
yes,
think's going on there, and how can women kind of work through that? Is that through this feeling
yeah.
really into yourself?
Yeah. And I mean, this is the thrust of the work that I have compiled in the book, is because of these patterns. Because again, you can get your health on lock and still find yourself going from like one so-called narcissist to another, or still struggling with, your ceiling for abundance financially and otherwise being just lower than you'd like it to be. Or maybe you're a mother and you just feel like you're locking horns with your kid at every turn. And you know the the patterns that we engage meet needs. And I learned that through health, right? Through my work with women who had been multiply diagnosed and chronically ill, sometimes for decades. uh, I learned that there were things that they were getting out of that unwanted experience of illness that they now had to learn to source in the terrain of wellness, right? Because, you know, this idea that there are things wrong in our lives, and if we just fix the wrong things, then we will feel happy. It's not a nuanced understanding of how the human psyche works, right? I actually prefer, and now I can't unsee it, to see life as if it is all wanted, right? It's just that there's a subconscious terrain, this shadow realm, that is pulling strings that you are not yet available to see, right? So, for example, let's say my daughter asks me for a ride somewhere, and I'm like maybe in the middle of something and I just don't feel like it. Uh, if I have a migraine, I can just say, "Oh, honey, I don't feel good. I need to lay down. I have a migraine again." And then what do I get from her? I get understanding, a softening of her expectations. Maybe even I get caretaking, oh, mama, can I help you? Do you need anything? Right. I don't have to learn how to say no ever, if I keep this up my whole life.
Mm.
Um, so I get yeses and I get nos without ever having to consciously ask for anything. Okay. Because if I just don't want to give her a ride and I say, I don't feel like giving you a ride, and let's say I don't even give a reason, woo, well, then I might have to experience feeling seen as bad and wrong, selfish, let's say, in the eyes of somebody I obviously care about. Um, I have to prioritize my own needs consciously and intentionally above somebody else's. Right. And if I do all those things, well, I might decide, well, actually, it's not worth it to me. I'd rather just give her the ride. Right. So then I'm also understanding that sometimes I sacrifice my own needs and wants to maintain connection. And what are the consequences of that? Well, if she doesn't appreciate the ride, I'm going to resent her for it. Right. So I start to learn about like, how do I balance this autonomy and
Mm.
connection thing? Right. How do I really ask myself, do I want to give her a ride? It's like these little stupid moments in life
Mm.
become deep opportunities for self-discovery. And So when we begin to explore our needs, both conscious and intentional, but also covert, we can see that there are things that we are getting out of. There's an upside to what's unwanted, and there would be a downside to getting what it is that we say we want that we don't have now. So, one of the simplest ways to enter, and of course, I believe there's a lot to unpack here. That's why I wrote a book about it, right? One of the simplest ways to enter is to think about something that's not how you want it to be, and maybe you know how you want it to be different, which we don't always know. But let's say you're lonely, you're sick of being single, and you want a good partner. Okay, well, what is the upside for you to being single? And what might be the downside of being partnered? It's super simple, but it's one way to begin to access some of the pulling the strings behind the curtain energies that are actually being fulfilled and met by the situation exactly as it is right now, that do not want anything to change. Okay. And that's also a way to start to feel like everything's okay how it is, and it's going to change when it changes, right? It's a way to start to rest into uh, a sense of trust, and whether you call it God or your journey or your process. And it also resolves this sense that you need to power over and through sheer force of will make things happen the way your conscious mind says that they are supposed to. Right? Because I think behind a lot of good intentions in the manifestation world, there is that rejection of what is and a desperate clinging to things being how you imagine they need to be in order for you to feel okay. But accessing that okayness in the current moment, I don't even know if it's possible unless you can develop an actual relationship with the part of you that wants things and actually really loves things exactly as they are, including with all the drama and, challenges. And I referenced it earlier, but I have a lot of experience watching myself like have two leaks in my house and my car battery's not starting, and an employee's acting like an asshole or whatever, and I will watch and feel my body as I am navigating these conflicts, right? Like, can't believe I'm a single mom, I have to deal with all this by myself, right? The things I get to say, even, and I'll watch the frank aliveness that starts to move through my body, my heart racing, I'm sweating, right? Like, I'm feeling more alive. Now, yes, it's also with a good dose of stress chemistry, but the distinction between that and excitement and, locking eyes with a handsome stranger as I walk down the street, kind of a somatic sequence, is really quite subtle in the end, right? So if I develop a relationship with that side of me that is pretty intolerant of harmony and peace and, you know, things being kind of chill, and imagines that the only way to enliven things up is through conflict, drama, illness, loss, accidents, then I can start to understand, like, oh, okay, I see why I might be creating the conditions or why I might have written the script this way, right? And eventually I might start to try on the practice of um, receiving what it is that I say I want, right? Including if that's harmony and peace and ease in my life. I probably don't have that yet because expanding to hold that requires a little bit of a journey,
Mm.
to get there.
You probably need to spend more time in that situation, or one does, right? As you say, in that peace and harmony.
Little
It's
bits at a time.
mm,
It's called,
really beautiful.
in chemistry, it's called titration. And the somatic experiencing world has borrowed that terminology, and it's really apt because you just start to give yourself, you literally set a timer for 5 minutes and sit and do nothing, right? Or 2 minutes or 1 minute, right? Or you go for me, it's like I'll go for a walk in my neighborhood and I won't bring my phone.
Mm.
So I'm not like voice noting with friends or listening to a podcast or a book or whatever. Um, I can do that kind of walk for like tops 10 minutes. Whereas comfortably, I mean, whereas like if I bring a distraction, I could walk for an hour.
Yeah,
Right? So
exactly.
you start to
Mm.
expand your capacity to send yourself a signal of safety in the midst of what you otherwise would imagine is coupled with danger, which is the case for expansive states.
But it doesn't sound like you're doing what is in positive psychology is repeating affirmations to yourself that you
No.
are
You
meeting
won't you
your
I'm not
ideal
your
partner.
affirmation girly. You
No.
won't find those, with me. And again, this is just, from my perspective about the, um, the willingness to dive into the compost pile of your rejected experiences in life, your rejected experiences of self, uh, you know, to begin to cultivate the garden that
Mm.
you came here to, enjoy. That's much more my lane, I would say.
And trusting in divine timing, right? It'll happen when it's meant to, when you're ready.
Yeah,
Yes,
which
you
is
see
way
that, yeah.
easier to do when you understand why you're actually enjoying what it is that you say you don't like that you have right
Mm.
now.
Yeah, it's true. Amazing, amazing, amazing book. I love your work. Thank you for coming on the show today and sharing it. Just I could talk to you for hours. Where can people connect with you, Kelly, and engage with your work? Obviously, the books are available everywhere, but please link how people can get in touch with you and everything you do.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you for your receptivity. It feels really good. And yeah, so I'm at kellybroganmd.com and we actually just decided to offer free consults. At this point, my team is offering consults to help women figure out like where they are in the journey, in the process. Because at this point now, after 15 years in the game, I have resources for women depending on where they are in the health or feminine reclamation journey, and to connect you to those. It's one of my greatest pleasures, to watch women really bloom in this way and come into the terrain of self-reclamation that requires a very special environment, I think, to really enjoy. So yeah, and so that's all available through my website.
On your website.
Yeah.
Thank you. We will so generous. We will link to that in the show notes. And yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Oh, thank you.